Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It is the end of January. You know, it's interesting. It occurred to me I hadn't looked up information about COVID pandemic in a while. And so I finally looked it up, and lo and behold, it's still happening.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
But it's no longer in the news. It's no longer a big enough of a deal to break through. I'm not even sure what to call it.
Well, it's like weird in that there's still people dying, and then if somebody dies suddenly, then the right wing will blame the vaccine as if vaccines just kill people suddenly, and not like and COVID doesn't. So,
well, you've read about the people who think that they can get vaccine side effect symptoms casually transmitted by people who have been vaccinated.
Yes, that are shedding the virus, quote unquote, which is hilarious. It's like, oh, do you believe in that being contagious, but not the actual virus? Our education system is meant to, well, the public education system is meant to make obedient people, and it's gone too far, even to the point where now they're anti-obedience, but obedience to the wrong people, and then just so proud of their ignorance, like, oh yeah, I don't know anything about biology, but I'm gonna tell you all about this virus shedding thing. Like, actual viruses don't spread contagiously, but when you get a vaccine, you can spread that. Like, I bet we'll get fucking flagged on YouTube for even just like mocking it, which is like so crazy, you know, that we got flagged for content at one point retroactively.
Yeah.
But also they don't tell, apparently part of their policy is if you get flagged, they don't tell you what you get flagged for.
Nope.
So then people can't get around it. So I'm like, this is the stupidest fucking shit ever, man. And that's I'm so glad we never tried to get dependent on YouTube monetization.
When I tried to appeal, it, and I said, I entered in text, show me where in the recording that this dialogue offended somebody, because this is an entertainment show. This isn't a news or fact-based media content program. We tell jokes mostly, and share opinions. If anything, it's an op-ed. But at no point are we we're not a fact-based journalist entity. We tell stories. I think that's the dilemma, is that people are turning to YouTube as serious sources of information. They're turning to, like, Spotify or Audible or any of these podcast platforms, anything more than like just a media delivery, content delivery platform. They think it's news. I'm speaking in very broad terms. This would probably offend quite a few people who listen to podcasts, but podcasts are not news. Podcasts are entertainment.
I mean, news isn't even news.
News isn't even news anymore.
It's funny, like, the whole practice is very much rooted in like monitoring ports and like the ships arriving at ports, and a lot of it to do with slavery, but we'll not get into that part. But as far as like what news actually is, it's really meant to be annals or reporting of events that are happening. and the way that it's become
I'm pretty sure it comes from
clickbait.
It's Newsport. Newsport,
Right. I mean,
is like the original. Like it was a port of information. You know what you're talking about? Like I remember reading about a variation of documentation called Newsport, and it's like it's not the kind of thing that you or I would look up. It's like information that comes in at the port level, all inventories of ships, the ships they expect to come in during that day.
That's what they would be in like the 1600s.
And so it's a document.
Exactly.
It's not. That's
like the modern day version of a newspaper evolved over time and in different regions. So there's like different practices with newspapers, you know, and there's like the effective archetype for a newspaper, but everybody doesn't do it in the exact same way. And again, in modern times, the way that it's basically become a means of selling advertisements and putting reporting in between and dubious reporting at that. A lot of it's propaganda or propaganda, and it's
even a newspaper,
not actual just reporting anymore.
Even a newspaper printed on paper, isn't it really just a magazine with a lot of content printed on cheaper material? Like the real difference between like New York Times and Vogue,
I think
fashion.
the difference being the frequency at that point,
yeah,
which again, it's
frequency,
like
quality.
There's like no daily magazines as far as I know.
Well, the internet creates daily magazines, but that content
not
is mostly
print, not
trash.
actual physical. I'm talking about physical.
Yes, correct.
And that's where again it's like there's zines on the or Zion. I don't know how they fucking say it, but on the internet they're not like. There's digital magazines and that those get like assembled and then disseminated as a magazine into like email, but then zines or whatever you call them are not distributed or packaged in the same way. But it's like a collection of information that is in proximity to each other. But again, it's like all of it is about selling advertisement in modern times, which there's a distance between that and then the actual intent of reporting. In terms of like, if your sales are dependent upon knowing what the audience buys versus what is just happening and deciding to go with the stories that are more likely to be sold versus what's actually happening, then this is where we've devolved into this clickbait, hyper polarized. It's not even just sex sells anymore. It's like if it bleeds, it leads. Like there's all these
insert salacious headline here.
Yeah, and it's like all of the drift towards this type of reporting has also in tandem desensitized the audience over time. So then it's like it has to escalate more and more. So like Tyree Nichols' video, it's like if you don't already disapprove of police violence, that video isn't going to do it because people are so desensitized at this point that it's like it has to escalate and keep like I don't know if you remember like rotten.com when it first came out, but everything is like people passing around snuff porn without even thinking about what they're doing in terms of like every time there's like a cop murder, because that's what it is. These cops murdered this man. Every time there's like a murder like this, people pass around the video in an attempt to invoke empathy, or if that's what they're claiming. But in reality, what it's actually just doing is feeding into that group of people who would like gather and watch black people get lynched, or gather, watch public hangings, and do the picnics. That's where that fucking term came from. Well, there's debate over it, but it happened. Like, they were definitely doing that. So it's not like that didn't happen. And when you have that group trying to outlaw the teaching of those, and being successful in outlawing the teaching of those things, then it makes it easier to descend into this world where, like, when people think that they're helping empathize by sharing that video of Tyre Nichols, they're actually dehumanizing a black life in the process of, like, forcing people to think that they need to see that in order to, like, value that person as a human being. That's actually inherently devaluing it in the sense of, like, not to say that it shouldn't be out there. It's more so the notion that people have to see that to be convinced. Like, if somebody is in the group that needs to see that to be convinced that there's a cop problem, they're not actually going to get convinced by that. So it's like, it's only actually going to traumatize black people, and then further give moderate white people the notion that they're doing something by, like, consuming black death in the form of media. It's like when somebody's getting murdered by police and then there's advertisements around it, like, that's not news. That's something so sinister that it's like news doesn't even begin to describe that level of sinister manipulation of emotion of the audience, of everybody in the process. Like, you have to be so emotionless to be able to, like, make money off of those types of things. And then in the process, you see these platforms.
They made a movie about. They made another movie about that. Well, not recently, but I think it was like in the last year or so. There was another one about that the Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh God!
And it's like, how many more of these are they going to make? Really, how many times do they need to make a documentary or a movie about Jeffrey Dahmer? Because that guy has had plenty of attention. I shouldn't
even know how it's legal in 2023.
Well, but I mean,
it obviously didn't happen this year.
I think I think the family of some of his victims, like, they're like, hey, we're not cool with this.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like,
I think almost all of them.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like, the families of the victims aren't a part of this. They don't want it to happen. How can this even be happening? How is somebody making money off of this story when, like, the people who are still suffering as a result of some asshole are still, you know, they're still alive. So it's, I don't know. I think we live in a very strange society. I remember when I was younger, I saw this Time Life Book of the Year, and it was like 90% black and white. No, 95% black and white. And it was all suffering. Nobody was smiling. It was like, occasionally you saw like a big cityscape, but it's pretty grimy. It's all black and white. Just, you know, street photography is cool and all, but it seems like a lot of the things that made it were like conflict photography. That's what was remembered that year. And then there was one small section of color photographs, and there were people smiling and people looked happy, but it was such a tiny sliver of the year in photos. I think people.
Well, you reminded me. Somebody went and photographed Appalachia the way that Americans tend to photograph other countries, and it was like they put those like yellow filters on, and like, you know, it was just very illuminating in terms of obviously that the America is not a homogenous socioeconomic landscape, but when it's framed to be this like shining beacon on a hill, so it leeches off other people's or other countries' uh, desperations that they also often create. It's like it's illuminating to see how much of that comes from visual framing and propaganda that is like in the form of never showing these things in that way or never showing them at all. And then in obviously more modern times, we see a more overt attempt to cover up the like, institutional racism that has plagued this country for centuries. But further, the result of that self delusion in terms of what they have to do in order to establish those optics also tricks those people within it to start believing that they're like drinking their own Kool-Aid and loving the smell of their own farts by the end, and then the shit's falling apart. Cause I'm like looking around, who's America at war with right now? And the answer is obvious. It's with itself in terms of when you really look at it, like the proxy war is with Russia, but it's not a hot war with between America and Russia. It's a hot war between Ukraine and Russia that America is contributing to. Not the only one, but the only war America is really in right now is with itself in the form of the police militarization and the uh, police brutality state that we are experiencing. And the more we like, this is happening under a quote unquote Democrat. So it's crazy to get to the point where there's like the only real difference between the Republicans and the Democrats at this point is the rhetoric, which is like at least the Democrats aren't openly racist, but they're funding institutional racism just the same. They're funding the police, they're increasing like the budgets for these organizations and then decreasing the funding for public goods and then like running on that gap as if they didn't vote for it. So it's like it's wild to see it actually play out because then we've been talking about like the big nothing in terms of that part of the economy eventually collapsing, but it's happening. And you see all these companies that were hiring at the beginning of last year, doing massive layoffs, shutdowns left and right in terms of like
entire divisions are being closed.
Yeah, divisions shutting down with no warning. I'm seeing reports of like people who will be on like an H-1B visa being like abroad and losing their job and then like not being able to get back in the country. And it's like something has happened in terms of the when we were talking about the United States building the wall as a prison instead of as a way to prevent immigrants from coming in illegally, it's like it shouldn't have played out this fast, except I think it was exacerbated by COVID in terms of like, you know, as we've been talking about for a while now, you can't maintain military industrial presence abroad when it's dependent upon people being in close quarters constantly without the pandemic just wiping that whole thing out. So I think we've seen that happen. I don't know if we'll.
I wonder how many of the people who are losing their jobs in the tech sector relocated during
Oh
during
my
pandemic
God.
and had a mortgage that are only 2.5 years into,
Yeah,
or a year and a
a lot
half
of them.
into.
Probably more than not.
I wonder how many of those people also bought a Tesla and they're only 2 years
Yeah.
into buying that Tesla.
Which, it's like really difficult for people who get this temporary stability in the form of like fat paychecks to fathom that shit can go away.
Because that's like a minimum of like a $500,000 investment.
Oh yeah.
In
And people like
minimum,
the
maybe more,
problem.
maybe close to like $1 million investment if you're in the wrong part of the country and you're buying a house in a really expensive place and are buying like $100,000 Tesla.
The biggest problem with this
Ugh.
country is that when people's uh, income increases, their spending just increases sometimes more than their income. So it becomes difficult for Americans, very specifically, to ever get to a point where it's like net positive or net gain, because money management is not just an inherent skill, and learning to like limit expenditures in tandem with growing income is like, it's very difficult, because you're like, oh, I'll just wait, get this next check, it's fine, and then the next check doesn't come because of X, Y, and Z, and then it's like, oh shit, my expenses are so far beyond what I can deal with when having all the income pulled, like with no warning, that it's like, yeah, I can only imagine how many homes are going to go up for or go into foreclosure because a lot of these tech companies didn't give these people enough warning to be able to transition into something that's going to be able to give them enough runway to maintain that mortgage and the car payment and the fucking insurance on both, and the fucking private school tuition for their 5 and 6 year old kids, that they wouldn't have done it if they didn't have the fucking job at Google, but because they had the job at Google, of course they're going to go to private school. So now their kids are going to start public school next year because their parents can't afford. So there's all these things that if you 1 minute you're making $250,000 a year, and the next minute you're not, and you weren't planning for that transition to happen, it can catch people off guard to the point where they're like suddenly living check to check. And people don't think that it can happen to them when they're making that much money, because it feels comfortable and it feels safe. And it's like, not to say that people should constantly be worried about that. It's more so that's why we need universal basic income, because people's like week to week dependency shouldn't be in the hands of their organization. Like that's a danger that's a national security risk right there, because then people get desperate and then they start taking jobs that they shouldn't, and then they fall into the traps of like those jobs that aren't real, that are just actually fishing for people's social security information, and then they'll put you through a fake interview, and then they'll be able to like figure out all these things about you to pass the fucking identity tests, because then the fake interview was actually just this huge phishing scam. And then that happens to so many people in America that it's like universal basic income is actually something that should be looked at as like a national defense priority. But because we are so wrapped up in still the trickle down rhetoric, even though that shit does not fucking work, the notion that businesses should control the flow of capital is obviously something the business's propaganda has planted within the like existence of the economy. But the further we descend into that, the more Americans like people at Google aren't safe. People at Microsoft aren't safe. People at IBM aren't safe. So for them to have their safety net completely pulled from underneath them to the point where some of them are then going to have to go on unemployment, like universal basic income should have just been there in the first place. So then it's not this like life altering fucking complete throw everything in chaos disarray where it happened in my organization last year, and it's like the only reason it didn't like completely like fuck everything up for me is that I didn't like put all my costs way higher because I was getting paid more. And like at a certain point, they started cutting pay within the organization because the funding was running out. And then the funders completely pulled the funding, and basically it was like the very last minute possible, but had been indicating that wasn't going to happen for at least 6 months. So it's like when I've seen it happen to an organization of 100 people where when you think you're safe, you do things that a safe organization would do, and then you find out you're not safe, and then it looks like all the things you did were terrible, but because that organization was in a different risk assessment state than it showed. So then you see like companies like WB. I have to wonder how much they knew they were in trouble like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because a lot of the stuff that's happening with WB now, you think it would like, you think it's reactionary, but it feels almost like, oh shit, they knew that their spreadsheet was far in the red. They must have known 5 or so years ago. So they just been setting up for this fire sale. So then they do it all at once, and it looks like an accident, but it's like they'd have to be really coordinated to pull this off without actually filing for bankruptcy, which is where that's what it kind of, because you see like Elon and what he's doing, it's like the way that Twitter torpedoed the in stock value, and also like in the process Tesla, because
I'm surprised he's still the CEO at Tesla.
Oh, they want him out. So
I know, but I'm surprised that they haven't like just like given him the boot and put in an interim CEO just to keep the ship moving forward slightly, so it doesn't just get like stagnant. Because
it's close to happening. So
yeah, but man, that guy, the value of Twitter plummeted, or not Twitter, well Twitter, but Tesla's he just plummeted so hard. No normal CEO would ever survive that kind of thing. They'd be just like booted out from the executive world. Be like, no, sorry, dude, you lost too many billions of dollars.
Yeah, and I think it's just because he has too many shares to be voted out without like I think it might have to be a unanimous vote by the board to actually get it, and I think his brother might be on the board. So I'd have to look at it. There's something that is preventing the board from just voting him out, and I think it's his brother being part of it. But again, it's like they definitely have started to move towards getting him out of the CEO position. And obviously it's because the trust in his leadership has almost become non-existent to the point where it's funny when you're like, yeah, people get that job at Google and they get a Tesla. It's like now Teslas are, even though right wingers aren't necessarily buying them, it's like it's not the signal or the virtue signal that it used to be that people used to buy them for. And then now, like, all this stuff is coming out about the resale and like if they get anything wrong with them, it's like not the smallest thing necessarily, but if they like get into a bumper to bumper accident or something where it's like not a huge thing for one car, a lot of these insurance companies are totaling them because it's too much to fix on the electric vehicle or on this electric vehicle specifically. So it's like easier for them to total it than to try to fix it because it's like the cost is almost as much. So it like it's not a good resale market car or aftermarket value as it used to be. In that not, you know, it's not going to be that way for electric cars forever, but these are like the first wave where what is it, like $13,000 or something to replace the battery?
It up to 20.
Up to 20,000. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like 13 if you're lucky. So
Looks like last year Tesla in China managed to manufacture 16,000 vehicles that it didn't sell. That doesn't happen in America, right? There's like a waiting list for Teslas in America, right?
I mean, I think there is, but it's partially because they can't. Well, I think it was like 2 quarters ago that they finally met their demand, and it's like the Cybertruck that they have waiting lists for because they can't deliver them at all. I mean, I'm sure there's. Well, no, that's where I think this. There was like one of the reasons they dropped the prices is because there was like a quarter where they didn't have the same type of waiting list situation. And that's all the people who had just purchased their cars were pissed because it was like a significant price drop. And that price drop only happened because their demand has dropped. So Tesla's in trouble and not, it's not going away. But that's why, they are looking. They've started the process of looking to shift leadership away from Elon, which is like, it's only a matter of time before everything does that, where you're like, if he buys Twitter only to be voted out by the board eventually, that would be one of the biggest L's in history. It already is in terms of monetary loss, but I mean, that's technically what's happening with Tesla, because he just bought his way into that, and now they're kind of trying to push him out. So it's like, money can't buy you people liking you or people like fucking supporting you forever. And eventually, that even the people that you make money will turn on you, apparently, because this, I feel, is like, he was the golden child of capitalism at one point. Like, he represented what capitalism, the pinnacle, could become. And that's where I'm like, it's, it's funny to watch play out in terms of like, he's finally getting to that point where people don't like him anymore, and even the people who invested in him are turning on him. So you love to see it, but it's also like, well, he's still controlling one of the biggest social media platforms and like manipulating information and like letting Nazis back on the platform and pushing more right-wing information than ever before. So it's not to say that he's without influence or without power anymore at all. It's just more so the problem was that he was masquerading as a leftist before, and a lot of the moderate and centrist Democrats were buying it to the point where he was like posting or retweeting Grimes' Communist Manifesto bullshit, whenever he was trying to pretend to be cool to get the younger chick or whatever. So it's like,
oh, that's so fucking dirty. That's like the slimiest.
Yeah, man. He was pushing universal basic income when he was trying to like get Grimes pregnant and shit like that. So for the electric car, formerly universal basic income, Communist Manifesto guy, to now be like,
man, that's a lot of effort to get laid. That's like way too much effort to go through to get laid.
But that's what happens when you're like a guy that is shaped like Elon Musk, that looks like Elon Musk, with the history of Elon Musk. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, apparently. Because
man, Sean is his latest kid. Kyle's gonna be the star of his basketball squad.
Imagine naming your kid that and then hating on pronouns. It's like he's doing right-wing drag in a way because he can't even really do it right. And it's like Joe Rogan did a pretty good job at transitioning into right-wing. But these like trans right-wing personalities, like you see
like
it.
What's that Congressman Santos?
Oh yeah.
They're investigating his ass because apparently some of his donors have come forward to say that they've been lied to, and other people on his donor list just don't seem to exist at all. And
yeah. That one's interesting, man. I'm so interested to see what is legal and what is allowed in politics, because it's like, if George Santos is a single roach, there's got to be a colony in terms of like, he's just the worst one that got caught, and the one that was the most obvious. There's no way that every other person in Congress has been 100% honest about their fucking resumes before. The issue now is like, what did they lie about on those resumes, and how much of those resumes are made up? Because again, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I see one person who they're not even, the reaction is more telling than anything, because they're not really like trying to push him out. There's some people who are vocal about it, but they're not really doing anything. So the lack of reaction is like, oh, well, how many of you other people here are lying about your shit? Is your name really whatever? So I don't know, man. Because like, there's definitely people on the left who right wingers have accused of making shit up about just being racist. But then there's like, surely there's actual people like George Santos who are making stuff up. And I doubt, like, knowing how many people who pretended to be Nigerian princes were actually Eastern European, I don't think the masquerading in Congress is going to be like Ilhan Omar. Like, I don't think she's like one of the people the right wing was accusing of fabricating their identity. I don't think it's going to be somebody like her, because there's so much scrutiny on people like her that it's like damn near impossible. You can't do fucking anything wrong, let alone like fabricate a personality. So when it's like the person who actually gets away with it, it's because they weren't being looked at. It's because they weren't being scrutinized. Like George Santos, if that's his real name, got that far because nobody was fucking paying attention. And then I guess he got invited to an event and didn't go. What people are speculating, because you have to produce an ID, and it was like a government event. It may have been at the White House. But it was like, because you have to produce an ID and your social security number, they're like, oh, he might be completely fabricating his identity because he wouldn't go to this event and produce his ID. So it's like, if it's that bad, where dude was claiming to be on Hannah Montana and had a whole, like,
What if his name is like Javier Santos and he's actually a Mexican citizen? or Jorge. That's it. Jorge. Jorge Santos. He's really from Mexico. He came here
Anthony
illegally.
he claimed to be Anthony Devolder on Hannah Montana. So that's his alias, is Anthony Devolder. Not George Santos, not George Devolder, not Anthony Santos. Completely different name.
Man. He's such a strange...
But he wasn't actually on Hannah Montana either.
course not.
So it's like...
Because the actual person on Hannah Montana is like, no, that's not me. I'm not that guy.
I don't think the person Anthony Devolder was ever existing or actually on Hannah Montana, but it was the claim that as Anthony Devolder he appeared on Hannah Montana.
Yeah.
And then they removed it, so it's like now the page is no longer there, but he had it up as like one of the things that he had done on his resume.
I wonder if the Anthony, whatever the heck his name is like registered with the Screen Actors Guild.
No, I don't think so. And that's where it was like,
because if you said 3 words, he's a registered member of the Screen Actors Guild for all time.
which is like, no, I don't think there was ever actually any acting. It was just made up completely.
Yeah. So
it sounds like George Santos is a 100% chronic liar. Which is, it seems like people have a hard time with grasping how those things operate. It's like when someone's a chronic liar, they do it without prompt and without restraint. And it just like the lies compound upon each other and completely disconnected from each other. And there's just there's no logic or anything to them. And they're just like, it's a compulsion, but the compulsion is also driven by wanting to exploit people. So it's not like it's not an innocuous compulsion or something that is without harm. But it totally just sounds like he's just a compulsive chronic liar, and just can't, like, if you asked him what time it was any time of day, the only time he would tell you honestly, it would be on accident. And that's where it's like somebody who just cannot for anything just tell an honest answer, because there's like some weird wiring that's going on that's making it impossible for them to like actually be forthright with a person. So as many lies as this person is told, that's where I'm like, you just have to just constantly be lying to get to this many lies about one's personality alone. It's like I can't even fathom like trying to construct that many lies, let alone like where does this person even get these things from? Like,
you'd think that just
why Hannah Montana? Why not like Salute Your Shorts or like
that would make just as
the
much
Cosby
sense.
Show?
You think
I don't know
that anyone seeking like to become an elected official, a member of Congress or federal congressional member, you'd think there'd be some kind of really hardcore background check performed by, I don't know, the Secret Service, because they might be exposed to sensitive information, things that are national secrets, anything that's concerns national security, anything like that. Like you think there'd be some kind of filter to prevent somebody who just makes shit up from becoming a congressman. It blows my mind. Like the military, they scrutinize the shit out of anybody who might have security clearance. Like, this guy's gonna be a congressman. Fuck.
Yeah, you would think. Well, and it's like I've had a background check done on a couple jobs. Like, one was doing like in-home repairs of different types, and then one was like being a guardian for kids under 18 for like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or it was like it was a 5-day period, sorry. But it's like in those, they like found if I had gotten like a ticket or some shit, where I'm like, dude, if those things can exist for just like a regular job, how are people getting that far in Congress with no clearly not even the most remote background check?
Well, obviously, people care more about who's taking care of their kids than who's taking care of their interests in Washington.
I mean,
those things don't have to like be at odds. Those things can coexist. At least how I see it.
Technically, they have the person in Washington has more influence over their kids than I did, in terms of like, I was watching them for 5 days, but the person in Washington decides the funding for the whole year for that kid to a degree. So I'm like, I hope they would do the background check on the person watching their kid for 5 days, but I would also hope they would do the background check on the person who's deciding how much money that kid's gonna have available for their education for the other part of the year. So maybe that's too much of me to ask.
Come on, man, fix the economy in 5 days.
The institution, at least you would think the institution would demand that much of its applicants in terms of like just vetting them in the simplest form of a background check.
I bet there's some spook at CIA or NSA who's like just watching Santos right now. Just that's their entire job is to watch. They're part of the Santos squad, and all they do is sit there and monitor all of his mobile devices. They watch him. They know his entire routine. They know what day he eats, like what day he like has his cheat day for his diet, all that stuff. They know his routine at the coffee shop at the corner that he sneaks off to. I hope he's just some kind of pathological liar who managed to stumble into Congress somehow. And it's not some kind of just dirty actor who is there to do who knows what, unleash some kind of torment on people. I think we've had enough politicians who just seem to unleash torment on people. Apparently, Cheeto Mussolini oversaw, or as the president was, oversaw more executions than any president since like the 60s or something like that.
Well, apparently he tried to push a bunch through before he got out of office.
Oh, that's even weirder. Oh man, I just read that he has more executions on the books during his term, and then part of the reason was something like about how it makes him look tough in terms of law enforcement, when a lot of those people were on death row prior to his administration.
Yeah, and he tried to exonerate a bunch of right-wing people while simultaneously trying to push through people on death row. So it's we're in a weird time. Politics have really made shit just the worst political timeline.
It's hard to take seriously sometimes because it seems like...
Oh, yeah, I can't take it seriously.
It seems like the weirdest version of Mad Magazine or Cracked Magazine. I'm talking about paper, physical, you can touch them and flip through pages and crinkle them magazines. The weirdest version of that kind of stuff. I think that's why I like astronomy and physics, because at some point it becomes about conceptually a 1 year of economic activity is kind of doesn't really matter. It's so what? There was economic activity for a year. In the grand scheme of things, it's just a data point. The big picture, it's just one of many influencing factors on the state of the planet relative to the rest of the cosmos. But that really only helps me in the short term, because all of those economic factors on the small scale that we exist in are very real, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that's the issue, is this is where the entire reason that they're trying to, I mean, not the entire, but one of the biggest reasons that they're trying to act like COVID was over is that the support that was offered during COVID at the very beginning is an obvious means. They actually have statistical proof now that it pulled people out of poverty, specifically children, that were then put back at risk when everybody has to go without any sort of monetary support. And the narrative that people who got government support were not working was not only fucking bullshit. Turns out it was the rich people stealing from the PPP program all along, and it wasn't the fucking poor people yet again. So the whole thing with Brett Favre stealing from a fucking welfare program in Mississippi and then basically just getting swept under the rug. The idea that people were more outraged about a fake Will Smith slap than what Brett Favre did is why you can't take any of this shit seriously. Also why it's none of it's gonna get solved with
Didn't
people in
Kanye
power.
get a big PPP check? I think.
I mean, probably. I would assume he had a bunch of people employed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure he did. So it's like it's not the issue of whether he got one; it's did he get it forgiven, and then why? If why did he get it in the first place? So it's like, uh, did he pay it out? Like, I'm sure if he didn't, he would have been. There's no way he would have not been in fucking prison. So
Yeah.
the fact that the fact he is who he is, I'm like 99% confident that he didn't break the law with his PPP loan of all people, because damn well motherfuckers would be itching to like. I mean, fuck him for being anti-Semitic, but it's like, yeah, as soon as like somebody who's anti-Semitic, like very openly has done some shit wrong, yeah, fuck him. Well, let's put him in prison. So that's where I'm like, you can tell he didn't do anything wrong with that, because when everything fucking fell apart, he's still not in prison.
Yeah.
So it's like Conor McGregor is more subject to prison at any given time than Kanye. And it's because he's definitely broken the law. But it's like, I think that's a testament in terms of like, yeah, Kanye's a fucking horrible person in terms of his views and the anti-Semitism. But I don't think he's broken any actual like criminal laws yet, because his ass he would have been under the fucking prison by now. Like, which is where I'm like, you can acknowledge that a person is a horrible anti-Semitic person, but then also acknowledge that, like, because they're black, that they're gonna still get a different form of treatment. And like, he's black and rich. It's like he's still subject to the institutional racism, which is where I'm like, there's actual Nazis in America that get better treatment than like a black person that says anti-Semitic shit, which is where I'm like, again, anti-Semitism, not okay. It's like the weirdness in terms of the responses that like black people get. Like, okay, Kyrie Irving, he didn't make the fucking film. He retweeted it. He basically got blacklisted. Dana White, fucking on video slapping his wife. He's literally had no repercussions. So it's like wild to just see like blatant racism in terms of like, when people do things wrong, you can like gauge racism in terms of like how much society wants to punish people. Like Michael Vick, when he was dog fighting, fucking, of course, terrible, horrible. But like Johnny Depp talking about wanting to fucking bury what's the name in the Rachel Evan, whatever her name is, Amber, I don't know.
Oh, the chick who was in Aquaman.
Amber Heard. Yeah, Amber Heard. The shit that he said about her, like, even if he didn't actually ever put a hand on her, like the idea that he wrote those fucking text messages and like the jury, like that wasn't even in dispute. The issue is like, did he actually physically abuse her? And the fact that those text messages were never in dispute of actually having taken place, those text messages alone should constitute some sort of crime, which is where I'm like, the fact that he said
that's assault, isn't it? Wouldn't it?
I mean,
if he'd have said it aloud, it would have been assault.
No, in text, it's like,
it's still assault
because he framed it as a hypothetical. It's not actual intent to harm. Whereas if he was like, I want to actually, like, I'm going to do this in text, that could be used against him as a form of like violating the law. Like threatening harm on someone is a crime, but hypothetically discussing harming someone is not. So that's why he got away with it, basically. Which is where he wasn't even on trial for that part. That was just like evidence to support the idea that he was as physically violent as she claimed. Which is where I'm like, yeah, she's a terrible person too. Like, I'm not about to sit here and act like Amber Heard isn't a terrible person. It's more so knowing the shit that Johnny Depp wasn't even denying he did. That's where I'm like, holy shit, this guy should not have if he didn't get found guilty in court, okay. But the stuff that he said, and he acknowledged he said on text to Marilyn Manson, he should not have a fucking career after that. It's the same thing when Mel Gibson said all that horrible anti-Semitic shit to the fucking cops and racist towards black people who weren't Jewish or black. He just said a bunch of racist shit to a white person because people know how destructive those slurs are. So those slurs are so strong, you see white people using them against other white people to hurt them in an attempt. So it's like fucking when Charlie Sheen called Denise Richards the N-word, it's like,
wait,
why would he do that? Why would he do that unless he knew that word is so destructive that it can just casually harm a white person when it's hurled at them? It's like if I threw a dagger at somebody, like a black person, the N-word hits them in the chest. Not every black person is gonna feel it in the same way because some people have like dissociated themselves from blackness to achieve a more acceptable appearance in whiteness. But even white people get glancing lacerations from that word, which is where I'm like, it's not the only one. There's like the when Michael Jackson used the K word, he got fucking censored. I didn't even know what the K word was until Michael Jackson got censored, which that tells you like what's it that song They Don't Really Care About Us, ironically, which was for Michael Jackson, that shit is heavy as fuck. He was like talking about like systematic inequality in that song, and then in the process him using a Jewish slur. I don't know his views. I don't know if he actually had anti-Semitic views or not. But the way he said it, it definitely made it sound like he had some like anti-Zionist, some Illuminati type views being harbored. So I'm not gonna act like he was right in that. It was more so you know who else got Ice Cube got censored on the K word before on No Vaseline. Which is where I'm like, there's definitely some anti-Semitism that pops up in the form of like the K word use. But I didn't even know if a lot of people even, I know I didn't know what it meant, or I had never even heard of it until it got censored in form of like, what word did they take out? And then you find out and it's like, oh, like I said, I didn't know that word even existed before it got taken out of songs, and then trying to figure out what words were taken out. So the whole thing is there is like everybody understands anti-Semitism is wrong. It's like deep down, Americans understand that it's wrong for people to harbor anti-Semitic sentiment. So we as a society will like censor the K word, and then in the process, we know as a society anti-blackness is wrong, but so much depends upon anti-blackness still being present that society not only doesn't do anything about it, it like does these things to masquerade as if it's solving those problems, oftentimes making them worse. So that's why it's like very difficult to discuss anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness if you're not just like, I'm not worried about offending people because I'm not anti-Semitic. The issue is if you don't say things carefully, your words can be taken out of context and then made it to seem as if you're anti-Semitic by people with bad intentions and bad faith who are just trying to garner division, which is why it's like the issue, like I think the biggest issue is we see reparations happening for the Holocaust. Like I just read an article about this family that is their family had to sell a Picasso under duress from fleeing the Nazis, and now the heirs want it back. Of course they should fucking get it back because they had to sell it under duress. It's not even a fucking question. So it's not like, to me, as somebody who understands how duress works and how reparations work, I'm not even in question of like, yeah, of course, not to say that the family should get it back and just turn around and fucking sell it to it. There are, I mean, they can do whatever the fuck they want with it. That's not my,
they totally should. They totally should.
Yeah, of course. It's like that's not what I mean to be like, well, they should get it back and preserve their. No, that's not what I meant to. It's more so people understand that when a government uses a situation to steal, that government should work to make sure that the people they stole from at least get some form of compensation in terms of like an attempt. You can't pay back lives. You can't bring people back to life. You can return the stuff you stole. You can at least return the fucking shit you stole. You can't necessarily return the land you stole all the time, but you should return some of the land you stole if you can, and it doesn't start another fucking conflict. So it's like, we know, we see it happening in modern times, but Black people have never really had proper state reparations made for state level theft of life and theft of property, or large scale theft by individuals that was enabled and empowered by state level influence. So that's where everyone knows that it's never done anything, but this society is dependent upon not solving that problem to keep people in a position of the current American caste system that they don't want to acknowledge. And the fucked up thing is, it's like, we're not even at the bottom. Native American people are at the bottom because I can see it. I've been there. They're definitely at the bottom of the caste system in America. So it's not even to say that Black people are at the bottom. The natives are just so invisible that it's like, as a Black person, it's like we're getting so fucking publicly murdered constantly that you have to talk about it in order to even set up talking about the native like oppression problem, in terms of like, you can't just jump straight to it because it's shit like Tyree Nichols again, where there was it Keenan Anderson 2 weeks before that. It's like, it's a nonstop barrage of Black people being murdered and then being having their identities deconstructed to make it seem like they deserve to be murdered by the state, as if anyone has that fate. As like, the issue is, even guilty people shouldn't be murdered by the state. Like, I don't believe in capital punishment personally. Like, I don't think that like it solves anything. If somebody's like a diddler and they get murdered, I don't actually care. I don't think it is a solution. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend I actually care if a diddler gets murdered. I really don't. The issue is I don't think the state doing that is going to deter anything or solve any. Like, it prevents that individual from doing anything. But that's where I'm like, there's only even like I said, there's certain things if somebody's like if they've actually done those things, I can't actually pretend for the sake of appearances that I care about that person getting murdered. I just don't. But I'm not gonna actually advocate that the state do that. Like, it's like you can acknowledge the deservedness without actually condoning the action. Like, me externally acknowledging that internally I don't care about diddlers getting murdered doesn't equate to me actually going out and advocating for capital punishment for diddlers. That's like two different states. And I think equating, like, also why thought crimes aren't real crimes in terms of, like, if Johnny Depp had never written that thought about Amber Heard, I would never even be discussing him in terms of whether he should go to jail for writing that. The issue is he took that and turned it into something that, even in its more benign form than a direct threat or an actual threat to do the things, in the form of wishing or wanting to do those things, if he had never even written them, we'd never know about that. And it's like, he may have come to realize that those thoughts were not actually his, and it was something that was a construction of anger and timing, and he didn't actually have that sentiment. But because he actually wrote it down, that sentiment exists forever. And he can't deny that he actually felt that at one point. Whether he feels it now or not, he can deny. But because he had that idea, actually went to the trouble of writing it down, now we know that at one point he had those feelings because he materialized those feelings. And that's where I'm like, Minority Report, you know, that whole idea of thought crimes is like, yeah, that's like a dystopian sci-fi to think about in terms of what if thought crimes actually became something punishable? Yeah, okay, well, let's go. Like, that is definitely, it could happen, but when you have a system in which people who actually go so far but can get around committing a crime because they know the technicalities and can phrase things in such a way that the only reason that he didn't commit a crime is because the word order or the word phrasing, even though if he had done it the wrong way, it would have constituted a crime, then those laws aren't just anyway. It's not even about justice. It's about some arbitrary form of enforcement. And I think that's where, like, American justice, it gets perverted all the time, but has been perverted to the point of the finality of murder is equated to justice when it fits the public, and then when it doesn't fit the public, it becomes grounds for revolt. So it's like, we're so inconsistent about how we apply the law. The reaction, there was more state level reaction to the anticipated response to the murder of Tyree Nichols than there was to the actual attempt to storming the Capitol by right-wing insurrectionists, which is like, obviously them storming the Capitol isn't them like taking over the government. So like on the one hand, yeah, you don't want to escalate something like that as much as possible, even though they put people's lives at risk. What was it, like one officer actually died or something? So like it wasn't an innocuous thing on January 6th that happened. Like, it's called the insurrection for a reason. But the reaction of national and state level government in terms of police response to the anticipated outrage over Tyree Nichols' death versus January 6th is like an illumination on why Black people are not, I don't think, holding our breaths anytime soon to expect the police state, the police industrial state to stop. But the issue is like white people aren't safe. I just think white people think they're safe from it. They just need to know that they're not safe. Like, I don't know at this point if any white people are ever actually listening to this show. Like, I know there's at least one or two in terms of like the people I know personally. But like in the future or in the near future, if any white people like hear this, it's like they need to know they're not safe from the police industrial state. Like, it's meant to make poor white people feel like they have a line between them and Blackness, even if it's a rich, like, even a rich Black person can get the cops called on them by a poor white person, and the cop is most likely going to defer to the poor white person. But that shit can turn on them too. And the issue is like, they've been flaunting it in white people's face in the form of Cops TV show. Like, Cops TV show is mostly white people getting arrested. And the idea that like now they're going to profit off of that. They're going to show you, going to arrest a bunch of white people and fucking run ads in between and get paid. We're getting double paid for taking your tax money to police you, steal money from you for fucking not putting your turn signal on. And then we're going to put it on television and sell fucking more advertisements. So the way that like white people are getting mocked and exploited by their own system in terms of like how the police state is slowly but surely turning on white people and monetizing every aspect of it along the way. It's like, after a while, they'll realize like, oh shit, I'm in the prison, but the whole lie depends on them perceiving themselves as not being in the prison, as like, even if the prison's in their neighborhood, as long as they're not behind the bars, they don't care if Black people get disproportionately locked up. As long as their neighborhoods are quiet, as long as they're there's no teenagers out on the streets after dark, they don't care who's getting locked up until it starts hitting their neighborhoods, until the fucking opioid crisis starts hitting rich white people neighborhoods, and then it becomes a fucking national issue. So like, I saw it. I mean, you saw it too in terms of like, once the opioid crisis hit rich white people, that's when the fucking class action lawsuits started to go through, and the class action lawsuits started to turn the tide in terms of like, what was it? Purdue Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Well, it's just crazy. It's just so crazy. There's still like essentially the drug war is just allowing for a sustained opioid epidemic. opioid abuse epidemic. It's still going on. It's just now they're bringing in fentanyl, and which requires less to get the desired result. And who knows what the hell is being put into, and people are just consuming it. Apparently, it's easier than ever to produce, which obviously is like a problem. I don't know, man. I read about the pharmaceutical industry developing all of these, crazy treatments that do all sorts of other things, and so there are shortages of drugs. Pharmaceutical programs basically are out of their materials because certain drug classes are being used to treat secondary treatment programs. And it's not just like insulin. It's well, I think it's all related to diabetes right now. But was it Pfizer or Moderna? Did they succeed in raising their prices to exorbitant rates? I kind of stopped following it because it seemed just like an absurd thing that was either going to happen or not. There wasn't anything I could do about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I did kind of drop off as well because it's so dystopian that you're like, I don't want to follow up on this story because
yeah, it's just so
I don't even want to know.
So like depressing. There's so much news that's just depressing, and it sucks because there's a part of me that just is like, fuck, I'll just tune out. But there are some good things happening, right? Surely some good stuff happens out there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not to say that. Like, I think it's just difficult to get out of the American dystopia because we're so bombarded with it. Which is like, on the one hand, it sucks that there is a proxy war between Ukraine and Russia happening with like U.S. and other countries' military support. But
yeah,
at the
they're
same
sending
time,
the
it's like,
Leopold or the Leopold tanks. Germany's finally decided to send them in.
This is the least hot fronts we've ever been on as America in like our entire lives, actually. Like, straight up. There's been no other time in either of our lives that America's been fewer hot fronts. Literally, so it's like, yeah, it's not a utopia at all, but it's like some days feel less dystopian than others. And I guess it's like also about like the perspective of the social psyche, and if the social psyche is like focused on something dystopian, then it seems a lot more which again, like, so like the anti-Asian violence that happened in California, there was like an immediate support for the sentiment. Obviously it's against it, but then once it was found out that the shooter of the first one was Asian, it's like people stopped like talking about it as if that was like, oh no, it's okay, it's intra-community violence. And what's fucked up is like,
because that makes it better.
no, you haven't experienced this before because it wasn't a thing in terms of like publicizing, but now you're going to start hearing more about Asian on Asian violence or Chinese on Chinese violence or whatever, in terms of like, they're going to make it seem like, oh, it's okay, that's their community's thing, like the rest of America doesn't need to deal with it, because this is how the notion of like black on black crime was created in the first place, and not crime as a opportunity by proximity, obviously.
Well,
always what it is. So it's like,
there's a Half Moon Bay shooting that happened recently, and the shooter was an older Chinese or Asian man, I think Chinese man, and his family lives in Half Moon Bay, and his daughter's in China, and he killed some Asian people, but I'm pretty sure he also killed a Hispanic person, and then he drove down the road and killed 3 former coworkers at a different place, and then he admitted to all of it. Said that he was bullied and all these other, like, not like it excuses it, but he, like, flat out admitted, yeah, I did it. And so I think it's really strange. I don't think this is Asian on Asian violence. This is definitely like just a person who hit their limit.
I mean, such a thing doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, but this is what you're going to start hearing racist white people come up with that narrative and construction, because that's what they've been saying in terms of like black people for like the last 4 decades, basically, as if like black on black violence doesn't exist. That's not a thing.
And
like black people aren't going out and killing black people because they're black. That's not a thing, which is what it makes it seem like, to equate hate crimes as if self-hate is the equivalent or the same motivating factor as racial hate. As if they are even the same at all. So that's where I'm like, let's say this person did hate Asian people. It's not the same. It's rooted in white supremacist anti-racism, but it's not the same thing as like, if a self-hating Jewish person lashes out at Jewish people, it's not the same as a Nazi. But Nazis depend upon those two things being equated to actually make the Nazi outlash less extreme or less.
It's like breaking news. Local hatchet gangs have it out in town square. I can see it now. It's going to be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you'll see people who don't know the difference between like fiction and reality gonna fall for shit like that, where like I guarantee somebody's gonna fucking make a Kung Fu Hustle meme that's making it seem like there's an actual gang fight, and like somebody's gonna fall for it. It's like I saw like somebody had posted a picture of Chris Benoit and was like, please pray for my uncle who fought in Ukraine. He lost his life on the front lines. And a bunch of people in the comment sections like praying for your uncle, and like clearly didn't know who fucking Chris Benoit was, and didn't get what a horrible thing was going on in terms of like, no, this is like dark humor. Like, this is the darkest of humor. But to see the people who fell for it, where you're like, the lighter versions of that are just like people who post like black and white images of modern people and like, oh, I pray for my uncle who fought in Vietnam, and it's like fucking Will Smith or something in black and white. And it's like, that's the like light version. But then it's like, you take somebody like Chris Benoit, and it's like, oh, that like makes it super dark when people are coming in like praying for it. And it's like there's just so many layers to it in terms of like,
man, the internet's
the
just
joke
ruthless.
itself is fucked up.
It is.
Like, it's super fucked up to make that joke, but like then the people who are coming in and like praying for him and like not getting the like, not taking the time to actually figure out if what they're responding to is not only is it reality, but not some horrible fucking horrific troll. And then in the process, like showing how reactionary they are by supporting the notion of Chris Benoit just because they thought he fought for Ukraine, not bothering to figure out who the fuck this person was. So, because then I think people would like post pictures of like young Charlie Manson and like before he had the Nazi or the fucking swastika forehead tattoo and do the same shit early on where it's like, I think if you didn't know any better, you might confuse Charles Manson and Jim Morrison.
No, no, no.
Like,
Charlie Manson and a young Jerry Garcia.
yeah, him too.
You know, that's like a really. You're right. That's a really dark version of the name your favorite Metallica song, and then they show a picture of like Alice in Chains, or
Yeah, or Pantera.
yeah, Pantera. Who's your
Yeah.
favorite member? What's your favorite Pantera song? And then they show a picture of Metallica. Or something like that.
Oh man. Yeah, I think those were one of my favorite types of memes. Um,
What's your favorite? It's like they show a picture of like Nine Inch Nails, and they say, "What's your favorite Nickelback song?" or something.
yeah, yeah. without naming Inner Sandman.
Yeah, without naming it or saying, "Man, what's your favorite Nickelback song?" Oh, that's
But that was when older people thought younger people were really that dumb. So that was why that type of troll was really hilarious at the time. It was like older people would just lose their minds in the comment sections like, there's no fucking Nickelback, you idiot, you fucking moron, fucking turd, fucking idiot. And it's like, that shit was like,
oh man.
man. Also, like when people would throw the gallons of milk and pretend they tripped,
Oh,
like for whatever reason, that shit just made me like, I obviously wasting food is not good and like having somebody else clean up, but like the idea that somebody is so uncoordinated that they couldn't carry a gallon of milk and like the people were reacting in such way as like oh, shame on that kid for not, so uncoordinated, like as if they weren't trolling them. It was like you could tell that, oh yeah, because this was before Okay Boomer too. But you could tell that boomers were so quick to judge the young people that encouraging boomers to quickly judge them became part of the fun. And it was like I was young enough to see it happening, so I didn't get like wrapped up in it. But I do think we're seeing like a very strong counterculture in the young people that also has a lot of like creating facades to make older people think that they're dumb or make them think that one thing is happening and a whole different thing is happening. And it's partially because they're like in such a dystopian situation that they have nothing better to do than just fuck with old people. But I do see it's like comedy has changed and the way young people are getting their kicks is like a dramatically different way than older people. Whereas like, it was okay to punch down for older people and that's not okay anymore. So I think younger people are getting much better at punching up in the process too, because that's what like punching down's really easy. And it's not usually funny. So I think when you have a scenario in which people know that they're like, oh yeah, you could like get you get a chuckle out of people who also enjoy punching down, but you can actually make somebody really amused and belly laugh if you figure out a way that like punching up amuses everyone because it doesn't like single out anybody that's possibly in the room with you. Whereas like, you know, if you're punching up at billionaires, like what are the chances that a random person's in the room with a billionaire? But it's like, oh, you want to make fun of somebody's fucking body shape? Chances are somebody in the room with you is going to feel bad because you made fun of somebody else, and they're going to internalize that thing because they've already got a problem with their body shape. So it's like you can punch down about certain things, but a lot of things you can't. And that's where like intelligence you can punch down about to a certain degree, but after a while it's just like
that's just barrel
it's
fishing.
just mean. It's just exactly, it's easy. But even after a while it just gets too mean-spirited to keep doing unless you're just trying to actually be mean. It's not even really funny anymore. So that's why I'm like, there's been so much punching down for so long that I don't think the kids coming up are amused by it because they see the people who are affected by it and have to deal with them. But then also, I think that it's like there's no novelty in it anymore. Like, not to say that, oh, we should be doing it if it's novel, but you know, I remember like the dozens on the school bus. No, like we didn't call it that. Like we called it Jonan, but it's the same thing as the dozens of the generation before us, where it's like everybody would just go around in circles making fun of each other's moms. And it's like if you didn't have a good joke, everybody's laughing at you briefly, if not for an extended period, because you have to like be able to like respond with the mom joke to distract from yourself. So people would like buy books of Jones, and like there was like a whole it didn't happen for a long period, but there was definitely a whole culture of books that were contained insults that people would buy just so they didn't get stuck being the person without a Joan. Because then it's like at that point, because the Jones were coming from books, then people would start, if you didn't get the first one off, somebody might use the Joan you had prepared. So then it's like, oh, I have to go to my second level, and then it's like a card deck at that point. And you're like pulling out cards, and you like the first person played their strongest card, but both people had that card. So now the second person can't play it. But sometimes the second person would get bold and try to play the same card, and sometimes it would work depending on the delivery. It's like I've seen those things devolve into like once a person runs out of their prefabricated jokes, they just start repeating what the other person says. And like the first one might get some laughs. And then after a while, people are like, wait a minute, he's just saying the same thing. So it's like there's a novelty in mocking a person by repeating what they're saying like a mockingbird. But you can only do that shit once.
Well,
all that said,
no,
we've gone through that. Like kids aren't going to do the same shit we did 30 years ago.
You can only do it once unless the person says, quit repeating me. And then they've fallen for the trap.
Right.
And then it becomes a game of how many times can you get them to completely lose track and engage in this mockingbird routine.
But if they don't, then
it only works. It only works if they take the bait.
Risk.
Yeah,
it's like a Hail Mary fucking.
Yeah, if they don't take the bait, you're done. It's like conceding loss, or it should be thought of as, but probably is not.
It's the
because
same shit with rap battles where Eminem wasn't the only one, but he was one of the first prominent people to start like dissing himself. Because it's like if you diss yourself and take away the other person's ammunition, then you can set them up to the point where then it's like once all of the air is deflated out of your argument, then I can go on the attack. So there's a whole strategy that, but it's risky. Like you end up talking about your own mom, you end up talking about your own girlfriend, and you end up talking about your own money situation. And it's like if you don't get to the end, you may just end up losing, and you're so it's like those things are a huge risk in that culture, but some people can pull them off. But again, there's only one Eminem. Like, do you remember Idea?
yes, I do.
He was
Around the same time.
He was around the same time, but he wasn't as good at Eminem at writing albums. I would say he was better at Eminem at battle rapping, but actually translating battle raps into albums is not easy. And you see a lot of battle rappers struggle with this issue. Because writing a cohesive album on its own is difficult, let alone if you're
Mac Lethal's another really good rapper, but I don't think he got the same kind of attention even. There are a lot of really, really talented rappers, MCs out there, and they just don't have the right kind of look, or they don't have the right they're just not getting the right kind of attention. They're in the wrong part of the country. They don't have the right kind of management. They don't know the right kind of touring agents. But you're right. There is only one Eminem. It's that.
And like with Idea specifically, he tried unsuccessfully to transition to that studio type rapper. But I think he was just too close to Eminem for people to accept him as his own thing, which is why then, like somebody like Mac Miller, he got to a point in his career where he started doing something different enough that, if he kept living, I think he would have continued down that path and continued doing something different. But when you're a white rapper, you can't escape being compared to Eminem because of his lasting impact, but also because he was one of the first recognizable, like, self-deprecating artists. Like, so that style, anytime somebody comes out and is like talking about their mental struggles and is open with it, or like talking about not getting the girl or some shit like that, or like it sounds like they're trying to be like Eminem because he was the first one to do it, when it could be them, but it's really difficult for the audience, I think, to get out of archetypes as how they approach artists. And this is also, I think, why artists have a problem doing anything different once an audience gets like an archetype in their head. It's really difficult for an artist to break out of that. So like, I think Lady Gaga has been a great example of somebody who hasn't really done the same thing, has been able to continue to do different sounds without losing her base audience. But like, trying to think, like Snoop Dogg he's had a problem actually keeping his base audience over his career. He'll get different audience, like he'll get a new audience, but the transitions between his different types of sounds is like, I think an example of somebody who's still been able to be successful in the long run, but actually had a difficult time keeping people continuing to buy his albums. Like I can't tell you the last time I bought a Snoop. I think it was like maybe 2001.
The only things that I can think of regarding
It was
Snoop
with
Dogg.
Pharrell with "Drop It Like It's Hot."
Oh, that's right. Drop It Like It's Hot. Well, the last I was gonna say the last thing I can think of that Snoop Dogg did that I can remember is he was in a movie with Jamie Foxx where they killed vampires.
Was that the Bones?
Um,
Oh no, he was a vampire in Bones. I haven't seen that one.
Day Shift is the movie. I think it's like a remake of a Russian vampire movie. He plays like a hard shooting cowboy vampire hunter in modern day LA. It's cool. But that has nothing to do with Snoop Dogg the rapper. It has everything to do with Snoop Dogg the actor, which is, after his Snoop Lion thing with where he wanted to make reggae and dub music and hung out with Eddie Murphy for a while, like I it's hard to think of him as it's just hard to take him seriously as making rap music. It's like, no, this guy hangs out with Martha Stewart and Eddie Murphy and makes kids movies. He's like Ice Cube at this point. He's pretty tame, and that's okay.
Totally.
Like I like tame Snoop Dogg more than Gangsta Fresh Snoop Dogg. Gangsta Fresh Snoop Dogg was cool in the '90s, but I'm like, I'm 40 years old now. I'm too old for that shit. But vampire hunting fantasy Snoop Dogg, that's awesome. That's like taking Snoop Dogg into the realm of like anime, and he can pretend to be a superhero. That's super dope.
Okay, so this is somewhat tangential, but not really. Like like getting older, the things that used to be like action now feel so unnecessarily like overdone. Like I rewatched the Matrix trilogy, the original trilogy, and like the action sequences in the second two films are all unnecessary. And what I realized in terms of like, when I watch an action sequence, it can't be mindless. It has to actually tell me something about the story or the character to make it useful. So, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen the Daredevil show.
Oh yeah.
On Netflix. Like every action sequence in that show, you learn something about Matt Murdock. Every fucking single one. And it's because of the way that they play them. Like some of them are still drawn out too long, even in that, but because of the way that it's cut, you learn about his durability, but also his willingness to push himself to a limit where you wouldn't actually be able to learn that if they didn't cut those first fight scenes a certain way, because they stopped cutting them the same way as he gets better at his martial arts, but also as he stops wanting to be hurt as much, and he like gets tired of having to deal with healing as much as he does, so he starts becoming more economic with his movements and becomes more acrobatic around getting hit. So the transition, like if you watch the fighting style in season 1 of Daredevil versus the fighting style of Daredevil on She-Hulk, it's completely fucking different, but they showed you the evolution of that fighting style over the course of the TV show. Most of them like maybe there was like one or two fights that they probably couldn't have done. Most of them you really needed to see that transition to understand what's happening. And that's where I'm like, in revisiting the Matrix, like a lot of the fight scenes didn't add anything. Whereas in the first movie, every fight scene adds something. Every fight scene has a meaning. Every fight scene adds to the story or character development in some way, which is why I did not include the first film in that in terms of like, I think when they had the first film, they had to use economy of like time for the fight scenes, whereas when given the leeway, I thought the audience wanted like a 20-minute fight scene and a 20-minute chase scene back to back with no words. But in reality, that shit is fucking exhausting. So it's like if the actors doing it are fucking exhausted, I'm exhausted too. As the fucking viewer, I just sit there and watch them do all this shit. So then you look at like the Mission Impossible films, their sequences got longer, but the individual action, like the individual sections of sequences were still broken up in a way that doesn't end up leaving you feeling like you ran a marathon as the audience. So that's where I'm like, it's not me in terms of like the younger, less critical version of me was not as impatient with the fight scenes, but older, wiser person that's seen thousands of real fights knows that even if there's no, like, even if you have unlimited energy, like this is unnecessary. You should have ended this fight. Like, you shouldn't be going this long if you know what you're doing. Like, it doesn't actually represent the thing you think it does by dragging this out for 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah, no, it's just seriously. I still love Dragon Ball, and Dragon Ball Super is
yeah,
amazing. But
me too.
that's the only story universe that I'm willing to put up with 40 episodes that comprise 30 minutes of real time action. But
I'm not anymore. I was, and I will never abandon that. But I'm glad that fucking Super shortened the fights. Like,
yeah,
that's the best thing they ever did. You
Yeah.
can get through a whole tournament in like 2 episodes. Holy shit. It's possible. Oh my God. You wouldn't think that shit is possible if you watched DBZ.
Well,
But like the way that they pace Super, it's like, oh my God, you can like have somebody get into a fight and actually lose instantly.
they had four. I think they had like four or five distinct story arcs within just Dragon Ball Super out of all however many episodes they had, and it's time flies when you're having fun in a sense, because I remember the Android Saga taking like 5 or 6 movies. Like, and those are all condensed from TV series.
Meaning that's if you don't include the Cell Saga.
Yeah, I'm not including the Cell Saga. That's its own like 4 or 5 movies.
Technically, he's part of that.
Yeah, but he's like part 2 of the Android Saga. There's like part 1 is also a whole freaking epic fight scene, and it condenses a whole couple days, or no, it expands a couple days into 5 movies. It's nuts. I'm glad. I agree. I'm glad that they figured a way to make things go faster, but they still, the final tournament of power still drags on for what seems like forever, and it's an hour of real time story that they're telling. But I think it's necessary, because when they charge up, they're altering the fabric of space time, so we can't observe it in a natural state.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.